Participant has entered the conference.
Ruth Walsh.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Judy Moss.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Joel Walton.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Bennett.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Good morning, this is Bennett. Hey, Bennett.
Good morning, Ron Herring. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Well, I'm standing vertical.
This is Judy Moss.
Hey, Judy.
Oh,
Joe Walton here.
hi, Joe.
And Joe. Good.
Jack Cumming.
Alrighty. So we're missing Seeger, Boyer, Nicholson, and Polk. And we still have 1 minute, I guess, to tell it one.
That's providing we all agree that we're running on the same clock.
I know.
My wife carries the clocks in our...
The following participant has entered the conference.
Hello, Dan Seeger.
Hey,
The following participant has entered the conference.
Charlie Polk.
Hey, Charlie. So we're only minus Nicholson and Boyer now.
To finish my observation,
Yes.
it sets the house clocks ahead a few minutes, like maybe 10 or 15.
Yes.
And I get excited when I hear the cuckoo clock get off and I'm late,
Yeah.
but I'm really not.
I know. My daughter does the same thing in her car, so she won't be late for work, but it throws me into a panic, I'll tell you. Well, we'll wait about 30 seconds more and then we'll get underway.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Walton Boyer.
Is Jack coming on?
Yes, he is.
Jack, Charlie, I had a couple of residents to tell me they couldn't open the current lifeline on the internet, and when I got home from lunch, I tried and I couldn't open it either.
Well, I'll try uploading it again and see if I can fix it. But I'll wait till after this call to do that.
Please do that.
The following participant has entered the conference.
Bob Nicholson.
Okay, now we're all here, so we're, Jack Matheson couldn't be here. He has a doctor's appointment, and Marlene is en route to Europe, so that's the other two that are absent. So I welcome everybody, and our purpose, I think, today is to review the financial picture, look at the spreadsheets where the financials are, what can we reduce, what agree that on the pilot program that we had talked about, and should it be implemented, and when and how. And then I think another issue we have to look at is to integrate or to upload, or not to upload, but to enrich our board membership so that we have perhaps an attorney on board, also a CPA, so that as we become more sophisticated in our governance, that we can utilize our own members to our best advantage. And so we're going to have to think about new blood to the board. And so all of this is a prelude to just taking a look at our financial picture. I know we've received the spreadsheets from Joe and our financial statement. Bennett has spoken to that, as well as Dan. And so let us proceed on, and we'll see how we can agree and that this sort of thing, and what we're going to have to look at once we have our board meeting in Dallas. Yes.
It's Dan. Just for the purpose of the minutes, is Bennett Napier on the call?
Yes, he is.
I am. Yes, sir. Okay. Here. Thank you, Bennett. I just wanted to be sure, so I have you in the attendance list. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so everybody's here, and I'm going to turn. I've asked Ron to guide this meeting today, and let's see how we proceed. So I'm going to give it to my friend Ron.
Okay, let me just set it in context. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time. I mean, we've all looked at the material, so there's nothing new, I don't think, under the sun, unless something unexpected crops up. But just a little bit of context. What got my attention was, and the reason I raised the initial question, how long could we survive if the pilot doesn't produce the revenue? After we discussed the pilot, and there were some questions about whether we would proceed, that question struck me based upon, because it would be probably into 2 years before that pilot with effectiveness, because the first year, as I think Bennett appropriately cautioned us, is not going to be a productive year in terms of income gain. It'll be the investment to get you there. And that's what triggered the question, because we knew that it would take a while, and so that's what got the process started. And then, as I explained in my email to you, two members of the board, Joe and Jack, did the analysis and came to the same conclusion, and the ugly word bankruptcy was the bottom line. Well, that triggered a lot of conversation by emails, and Jack was able to fill in from the email that I sent you. He was able to fill in some of the data and trending that you could see, and then there were some recommendations. A little bit later, I think Jack and Bruce put together the email of October 6th, a couple of days ago, with 4 critical questions. Those were basically inherent in the questions that I had asked. And I would want to just suggest to all of us, if we looked at those 4 questions, do the financials present the true picture? If we have financials showing true finances, is NaCCRA in fact financially viable? 3, if NaCCRA is not viable, what steps do we take to make viable? And Ruth has just spoken a bit to that. And then if financial steps toward financial viability are needed, we have time to bring those steps in effect. And what emergency actions would they take? But I would like to add, and I think I alluded to this in my original email, how did we get here? In other words, I think if we miss the opportunity to have some discussions somewhere in this context of how we got to this point, with a fairly heavy-duty issue on our hands, we're likely to repeat it in the future. Is it monitoring? Is it misunderstood accounting? Or what is it that brought us to this place? It could also be that we began spending and didn't align that spending with an existing budget, which would throw off your reporting. So I would urge us to see if we can find some time in these deliberations where we could also address the question, how did we get here? So that's the kind of background I would offer, unless someone would have any questions of me.
Well, on your first question, Ron, in my opinion, had we had the kind of meeting we're holding today on this conference call early in 2011, a lot of these problems would not be present today.
And I'm sure that's so. But we have grown since 2011, and we can begin to face what we didn't want to face. And I think Charlie had often said that early on, their officers, none of the officers received any remuneration for their trips and this sort of thing, and that was good. But then there are those cases where we really needed to give incentive to our people to do some of these trips that we need to do, and try to figure out ways to get money in order to do that. And so, it's been one thing compounding the other, so now here we are, and this is where we're at and what we got to really work at.
I presume that the voice that just preceded yours, Ruth, was Joe. And I think we've been on these telephone conference calls enough that we're beginning to get voice recognition from one another. Yeah. But it would be helpful if we could just say, this is Joe or this is Jack.
Good idea.
It'll help us move through it.
It would help me with the minutes a lot if people did that.
Yeah. Right.
This is Dan.
Well, Dan, in addition to the minutes, I want to commend you for your
line.
I mean, I'm saying that out of respect for your intelligence. I mean, and I'm not being facetious. I mean, your insight and the fresh face, or fresh set of eyes looking at it.
Who's that talking? Who's talking?
That was
Let's let Dan answer.
Well, who asked the question? Who asked the question? That was Bob. Oh, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Well, I'm kind of assuming that we can think that what happened in 2011, 2010, 2011, 2012 is more or less a closed issue, that we just have to live with what happened, and that we're trying to deal with the current situation in year 2013. And as I circulated a thing earlier today, as I try to understand the situation, it seems to me that if we sort of assume inflationary increases in all our expenses and our income from 2010 to the present, and eliminate in the current year the contribution income, and if we just align the contribution income with those expenses for which it is designated or restricted, I come out with a deficit in the current year of $8,000 as compared with the projection of surplus of $8,000. So, but the weakness of my analysis is that none of us seem to have the figures regarding what officer travel is for the face-to-face board meetings and what officer travel is for other purposes, how much dollars of officer travel for other purposes is covered by a restricted contribution. So once we have that, we can pin down the $8,000 deficit, plus or minus whatever it is, and then we can proceed from there.
Joe speaking. We can do that retrospectively. We have to define what is a face-to-face meeting. If it constitutes one day, one night of hotel and airfare, we can calculate that, and also on the basis of the number of attending the meeting. Subtracting from that contributions made by the participants out of their own pocket.
We have some feedback coming into our conversation from some source. I don't know.
If someone's on a speakerphone, if someone has it on speakerphone, that'll give that kind of feedback.
That'll throw the feedback.
Yeah, we should not use speakerphone.
Okay, so if anyone in our group has a speakerphone into this conversation, could you switch it? Let's try it and see what happens. Okay, go ahead. Dan has just responded, and Joe has responded to that. Other comments or observations? Hello?
Yep. Well, the other thing is that the really tricky part that we have to deal with is making a budget for 2014, which realistically balances expenses with income.
Yeah. I did some commentary on this in response to Dan's questions when he asked members of the board to respond, and I see a host of issues that may have been accumulating. One of which was the restricted fund that Jack had created for expenses for Ruth and I. If you pull that apart, just as one example, there may have been some expenses that we added that were not budgeted when we instituted the role of president-elect. Now, what I have used the expenses for have been to get to board meetings and back, and the hotel costs affiliated with that, and one trip to Washington, D.C. to negotiate with Leading Age. So far, that is what I have expended. Now, we have yet to expend the dollars for the board manuals, and that was given to me as a framework of not to exceed $2,000. against which you would charge. The restricted dollars was thrown into a sort of a general pool, and that gave us a false picture. That was one of the major, I think, one of the major issues that put us in the position that we're in now with the deficit rather than the excess.
This is Dan. Ron, the expenses you've just described are relatively modest. So that leaves us with the question of exactly why the officer travel expenses have gone from $3,000 in 2010 to what I presume will be roughly 2 times 7,000 or 14,000 in the current year. That big escalation can't be accounted for by the very modest expenses you just described. So this is one of the mysteries is this fantastic escalation in board expenses and board officer travel expenses.
Well, the only way, and just the rest of you chime in, the only way I can see that we're going to get an answer if we all agree that that's a critical piece of information unavailable to us for decision making, and that again would defer decision making, which is not going to be our favorite choice. But I would suggest that the only way you can do that is to go back and just unfold all of the expenditures and track them as per function, and you get your answer to that question.
Mr. Seeger, this has been at Napier. If I could respond, Joe Walton could also concur. I mean, effectively, there's two aspects to your question. To some extent, I think two things have transpired. One is you have more people on the board than maybe you did in years past that are actually claiming reimbursement, meaning they're not doing it either all or any in kind where they did that in the past. So that's one issue times 2 meetings a year. And then it's not a large piece of the increase, but Reverend Nicholson was authorized, for some ancillary travel, and which most of them have been fairly modest reimbursements, for train or hotel, where he was already in a geographic area and was able to hit, 4 or 5 CCRCs, in a geographic area. So you've had that, but I'd say that the lion's share of the increase is more people are actually claiming reimbursement under the existing reimbursement policy that NaCCRA has, where in the past they may have just done it as an in-kind contribution.
Ron, Charlie Polk, I'd like to add a comment too, please. One thing that's happened during the last 5 years is we've gone from an East Coast organization to a more national organization that includes 2 board members or 3 board members from the West Coast. We've never had that in the history of the organization. Not only that, until 4 years ago, all officers were only allowed 2 nights or 2 days of reimbursement for any meeting. If they wanted to attend the entire leading age meeting in the fall, they had to pick up the other 2 or 3 days, and they were only reimbursed for 2. If we ran over at the annual meeting in the spring, we still only paid for 2 days. That was a big jump when we added the West Coast officers. And another thing, during my 4 years as president, I would say at least 2 of them there was 0 reimbursement, and one of them only 50%. And then the last year we finally got up to where we could pay 100% to all who asked for it, but banking on my recollection, I can never remember over 1 or 2 of the board members asking for any reimbursement. And back then, we had more participation by the state organizations, and they paid their representatives' way to our meetings. And I think now the only one that does that is the state of Florida. The FLACRA organization still pays for their rep to attend the national organization. And when you add all those things up, although officer travel is, as somebody has said, is a small reimbursement, when you go from 4 officers to 10 and they all have a little bit, that makes a huge impact.
Right. Charlie, let me add a couple of things. I don't disagree with anything you say, except to add that there are other state associations and in some cases communities that are contributing to the support of representatives going to these meetings, paying part of that travel cost. They do that certainly here at Seabury. They do that with the state association. The other thing to keep in mind here is that when we go to these meetings, they do extend to 3 and sometimes 4 nights. Part of that is that we're staying for the leading age meeting, but also manning a booth. All part of a plan to make NaCCRA better known and to help in the recruiting effort.
Who just spoke? Who is speaking?
Joe.
Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
This is Ruth here, but may I just add that exhibition booth that we have is comped by leading age, so that there's no cost to us other than getting materials.
But they're not spending the money to cover the meals and the hotel bills for the NaCCRA members who stay on to man the booth.
But theoretically, it is Ruth again, theoretically, we have always stayed anyway, so it was just a matter of diverting our efforts.
The question here, as I understand it, how did we get from where we were to where we are today? And I'm trying to, answer that question to fill it out. The numbers that I have been reporting as actual incurred expenses, the actual costs have been higher. The numbers that everyone's looking at do not reflect the expenses incurred for which the members have not requested reimbursement.
Right.
Nor do they take into account the contributions that come from others. But to put this in perspective, we do have to obviously do a better plan and better at planning ours. But to put this in perspective, if you're going to have one board meeting a year and you're going to have 10 representatives at that board meeting and you're going to stay one night, I estimate your gross cost is going to be like $6,500.
Right.
Less whatever state and local communities contribute or whatever the participant contributes out of their own pocket.
And Ruth here, that is so, and I know Stonebridge and Connecticut both contributed to my expenses so that I was able to keep it to a minimum. But I know that's an important issue.
This is Ron. Let me give back to you what I think I'm hearing. That what has happened to us to maybe put us in this position. We're answering the question, how did we get here? And I think Bob just referred to that. It appears to me as if the comments that we're having, some added by Charlie, some added by Joel, some added by Bob, some added by a few others, when you wrap all those together, they seem to come down to expenses that were unanticipated because of subtle changes that were not anticipated in the budget process itself. Now that assumes, if you try to correct it, that assumes that you can anticipate anticipate all of that. And the reality of budgeting, as most of us know, is you can't. And that's why budgets, at least those that I've worked with over time, have contingencies built into them. In other words, they build in historical 10% or 12%, or they know of some potential upcoming event, so they throw in another contingency number into the bottom line somewhere, and that anticipates something that could happen, and it keeps you out of what we're describing. So if you wrap it all up and tie it with a pretty red ribbon, what it seems to be saying to us is tied to the comment that Bob, I think, just made, and that is that's anticipation of potential things that could or would or may or something else could happen to us in the future. And one of the ways we get around that is to have some pretty good experienced heads at the budget building table.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by experienced heads is I mean people like Charlie and Jack and a few others that have been around for a while and know what some of those unanticipated things could be, and can help us do that kind of contingency planning and build a budget on that. Now, the second half of that observation is whatever the budget bottom line turns out to be among a host of pieces, whatever the budget line bottom line turns out to be, it can't be exceeded beyond a plan in terms of income. And so you have to work both sides of the track in order to get there. But I just wanted to feed back to you the things in a sort of a summary fashion, the things that I think I'm hearing.
Well, and I would add to it, Joe Walton speaking, Ron, that when you operate without a comprehensive plan, you're almost bound to encounter unanticipated expenses. No, we're doing things that we don't have a plan to measure them against. We've never had a comprehensive plan. And I think that's the lesson that, in my opinion, I think we should take away from this experience.
And this is Walt Boyer. If I can take a few minutes, I happen to be the treasurer of North Carolina. In 2011, we had a loss of $2,000. In 2012, our loss was $8,000. This year, we're going to break even. And I'd like to describe how we did that, which may be helpful in your thinking. At the beginning of this year, I decided that I was going to put together a budget that was balanced, and that we had to sacrifice to do that. We were going to sacrifice to do that. I did two things. I cut the number of newsletters that we publish in half over the year. I also put out an appeal to all our officers that if they could afford it, that they absorb the costs of their travel. Those two things essentially brought us down. It turns out that we had, although I had money in the budget for officer travel, we used very little of it. That turned out to be a godsend because this year we had a special consultant come in and conduct a session with us on strategic planning, which cost us an extra $2,000. And essentially the savings from travel provided the money that we needed for that. We still came out even for the year. The reason I think we were successful this year is that we said we are going to develop a budget at the beginning of the year that is balanced, and we're going to do our darnest to stick to it.
Right.
I would budget for the ensuing year. And if it means cutting out some things that we feel are important, then so be it. I think that we need to be balanced, and our membership needs to understand that we're trying very hard to make a balanced budget. We need to publicize that, which I did at the annual meeting last year, and I'm going to report on our success in 2 weeks when we have our annual meeting in North Carolina.
Joe Walton here. Walton, I want to respond to that, and I think you make an excellent suggestion. I'd be happy to work with Bennett to put together a budget. But before I start on that work, I want to be clear on what our objective is. You know, I've heard since beginning of 2011 that our mission is to grow the business. And there's a lot of things that we can do to save money. But in the process, we might find that instead of growing the business, we're losing members. To cut our newsletter, for example, that's a way to cut expenses if that's the number one goal. But in my opinion, let's be clear on what our goals are and develop a plan and then do the budget.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, with this wall again. There's nothing wrong with that, Joe, that approach. And I'm not suggesting that NaCCRA should necessarily reduce the number of newsletters it puts out. What I'm saying is that we sacrificed in some ways to produce a balanced budget, and I think that we need to look at the expenses that NaCCRA is experiencing, find out where we can best sacrifice in order to create a balanced budget. Doesn't have to be the same thing that North Carolina did. Maybe much better for NaCCRA to look at other areas.
Joe Walton here again, and I understand that's perfectly clear. But you know, we started this meeting today. Ruth made reference to a plan to build membership, and I've got to be clear on whether or not we're going to stick with that plan and go ahead with that. I spent a lot of time trying to balance a budget.
This is Dan. As far as I understand the situation, we have decided to cut from 2 face-to-face board meetings a year to 1. So that should mean that in 2014, even though we're now a coast-to-coast organization rather than just an East Coast officer group, that should result in a substantial reduction in the officer travel line item. And the other thing we could consider, it seems to me, is that since the concentration of officers is on the East Coast, it might make sense to meet on the East Coast so that only 3 officers have to travel long distances. And the other thing is that it might be useful to send a representative or 2 to man a booth at Leading Age and have our meeting separate from Leading Age so that we can meet in a cheaper place than Denver or Dallas or Washington. You know, not necessarily try to piggyback on Leading Age, which tends to pick expensive venues which can accommodate 8,000 people.
This is Ron. I want to comment on what Dan said, and this may not be entirely true, but the one meeting a year was suggested by me when some of this began to build and you began to see what might be forthcoming in the future. But I'm not sure we actually agreed to do that, and so I think it needs just a point of clarification.
Thank you, Ron.
It was a suggestion I made, but it could be one of those things that the core group, you know, regardless of if it's Bennett or Joe or Bennett and Joe, and then whatever consultants they want to use off of the board to give them information. And I think we Joe's idea that if we have some major goal, some things we're trying to accomplish, generally you can put some parameters, some fairly realistic parameters into the numbers to accomplish that. For example, if we want Bob to do more, if we ask Jack, for example, to push the chapter memberships, and if there's a way to do that without varying all the revenue that comes from that and more expenses, then we need to have that conversation with Jack's experience that he had in Ohio and other places, and we need to tie that into some thinking where expenses, goals, and income are bound together in the best estimate that we can come up with.
This is Dan.
Oh, go ahead, Judy.
Can we talk about the revenue side, the increase in membership? My recollection at our last telecon was that we were going to get a proposal from Bennett on the flat group plan and how it would work and what we could expect of it. I have never seen any proposal. Has there been one?
And this has been, effectively we circulated the pilot project document to the leadership, and I can resend that. And that pilot project, I think some folks got confused between the pilot project, which is, kind of setting forth some targets of how many members we would want to get and in what types of communities or where, which to some extent is separate from a revenue issue in terms of dues increases. So that, from a dues increase, if that's the question on the table, the last time that was submitted was at the Boulder meeting, October of last year, and there was no action taken on that proposal that was submitted by your treasurer.
This is Ruth here. I went back and looked at the dues situation, and since we were born, I have all of the information from 2002, and we have never had a dues increase. We have been $15 individual, $150 for membership, for life membership, and $400 for state association. I think we really truly need to look at a dues increase, and I probably am a minority of one, but that's something that we really need to look at. And this ad hoc committee that we're proposing for a budget, maybe they can consider that.
This is Ron. What Ruth just called to our attention, in some ways, just denies the reality of the kinds of increases in everything that we face in the world that we live today. To say that you've not had a dues increase in 4 or 5 years just ignores the fact that air travel has gone up, everything has gone up, and everything has gone up, and we're trying to cover, in some ways, this is not the answer, it is a piece of the answer.
Yes, it is.
But it does not, just by its very nature, it ignores the fact that in the last 4 or 5 years, there's probably been somewhere between a 5 and 7% increase in the cost to do business, but we've kept the revenue to do the business the same. And that doesn't test against the reality of what the world that we live in.
This is Dan. Not to distract from what has been said, which is very important, I would like to get back to the issue of the FLYCRA-like expansion that I've heard we're anticipating several times. I guess what I've lost track of is who has seen this plan and what exactly is the plan, and why did the administrative support line in our expense budget go from $6,000 in 2010 to what looks like it's going to be $18,000 in 2013 without producing the FLYCRA-like increase in membership? I don't understand that discontinuity between lack of membership growth and big expense growth on administrative support. Maybe, Bennett, you could help us with that.
Yes, this has been I'll be happy to answer the question. Let me clarify what we're talking about. The FLICRA concept, this board only in this fiscal year, meaning 2013, earlier in the summer, started to talk about incorporating, quote-unquote, a FLICRA chapter-type concept with NaCCRA. I'm going to clarify what that is, and I'm going to go back and answer the question on the admin support. The chapter concept, from a FLICRA standpoint, if it was incorporated and fully integrated into NaCCRA, would create a mechanism where, and I'm going to use this just from an example standpoint, a place like Ohio, where no state association exists, that effectively those residents in those communities in those places would pay a higher dues price to NaCCRA. And you would, and it has not been determined yet because this board hasn't voted on it, the board effectively would say, okay, X number of dollars are going to be earmarked to go back to the local community to foster grassroots efforts to grow NaCCRA in the local areas. So that when we use the terminology FLICRA concept, that's what comes into play, is that there's effectively a local chapter refund that goes back to the local area for them to put on programs and events and foster activities to support NaCCRA's mission. So I just want to clarify what that means when at least what it means to us, meaning Charlie and myself, when we use that terminology, that's what is encompassed. So the FLICRA concept had no correlation, to the admin support increases, because that's only come on to play since this year. When Charlie, you can help me, but I mean, probably for maybe 6-7 years, you had effectively an outsourced consultant, Coburn and Associates in Lakeland, that did very limited scope services for NaCCRA, and effectively he received membership renewals, new member applications, processed them, tracked them, and deposited them into the bank. And that was the scope of his service. Now, at the time that we transitioned to partners, I believe his monthly fee was going up to around $750 or $800 a month, because he had not had any increases for quite some time, and that's where his billing was going to be should you have stayed with him, and not transition to partners. That was what it would have been monthly for that one element of work. Right. What transpired in terms of partners is we came in and were retained to do that function, but also have an ability so that it wasn't always going to volunteers, that you would have a centralized office that we answer phone calls, we respond to emails off the website, anything like that, because you didn't necessarily have that platform before. Outside of when Charlie was president and executive director, he was doing that effectively by himself. And so the other elements of scope of service increased with partners. We were asked to add doing the accounting and the bookkeeping. You still have a treasurer, obviously, but the actual check writing, financial statement compilation, all of those functions that were traditionally had been performed by volunteers were now performed by partners with our partner CPA firm. And then we also, scope of work, were asked to take over coordinating the printing and the mailing of the Lifeline. Because up until, I guess, about a year ago, your editor, she still does the editorial, she still works with the designer on layout, but she was personally coordinating the printing and actually hand mailing all of your lifelines to all of the members that were getting them.
Ben, Charlie, please let me interrupt you for a minute. I've got two politicians that I'm hosting at the States this afternoon for a political forum, and I must leave now because I'm to meet them at our lobby at 1:45 and get them set up for the forum.
is Ron. Let me just make an observation about Bennett's explanation to Dan's question, and I think from what I know, and I'm running out of time here to say I'm the new kid on the block. Somebody's going to pull me up short one of these days and say, well, that's not going to work anymore, Ron. You have to come up with something else. But here's, and I thought his explanation made a lot of sense. But if you listen to him carefully and ask yourself, what were the theme words that he was using? We were asked to. We were asked to. We were asked to. Now, here's my interpretation of that. What it meant was that we were having difficulty, for whatever reasons, doing that on our own. Using the latest example in we were asked to, Bennett's reference to the
Lifeline, right?
Yeah, Lifeline.
Okay, let me respond to that, Ron, then I've got to go. Charlie, the greatest thing that Bennett done was give us a permanent address. And a national address that we were not continually changing, and that helped with membership more than anything else. But you can let an organization that's going to operate on a national level, if you let it, a handful of residents will become full-time unpaid volunteers. And that's what we were getting into. And I've watched, and I know that there's a lot of volunteer work in the other states. And the beauty of FLACRA, and I was president of FLACRA for 2 years, and I've been a member of their board for 6. The beauty of FLACRA is that they can afford for partners to do all the administrative daily tasks, and it leaves the volunteers the opportunity to visit communities, talk to residents, and keep up with the membership growth. And that's the real beauty of it. And there's not a doubt in my mind that membership in NaCCRA is going to mushroom if everybody gets behind it. And I was very conservative when I said in Lakeland that we could increase 50,000 in the next year.
Charlie, you may have misunderstood, or maybe I wasn't clear. When I ran through that sort of repetitive scenario, what I was not saying was that was not a good thing to do. I'm saying it is a lesson that we need to maybe take, because the rest of NaCCRA doesn't have what Florida has. And what I was trying to say was, if we keep saying to partners, or have kept saying, we've been asked to do, that's all of that from my perspective is a very legitimate ask.
Absolutely.
That's correct. And
that's very legitimate. So I'm not challenging the legitimacy of what we've asked him to do, which has driven up costs.
Yep.
I'm speaking to the fact that NaCCRA has to face the fact that it's going to have to operate on a budget that supports that. And if we don't budget and we're not sharp enough to figure out what it is we need and a way to produce those assets and those resources to get the ask. I agree with you 100%, Charlie. You cannot run an organization like NaCCRA and what we're trying to accomplish and going to the next level, quote unquote, on the basis of just volunteer help. It won't work.
Absolutely true.
You'll never get there.
And Ron, I'm sorry, but I've got to go now.
Okay. We'll keep you posted.
Charlie.
If that's the truth of the
following
situation.
participant has left the conference.
Charlie Polk.
Ruth here again, but this is the truth of the situation, and if we are going to grow and we're going to flourish, these are the things we have to face, because we cannot we cannot continue to try to be a totally volunteer organization and stay sane. So let us proceed on then.
We've covered a lot of answers, I think, to our questions, and
I haven't gotten an answer to my question. This is Judy. I still don't know. Did we get a proposal from Bennett on what it would take to make us copy FLICRA.
Okay.
And that was what I thought was happening after our last phone con.
Ms. Moss, this has been. I apologize if for some reason you haven't gotten. I believe I sent out the initial one. I think sometime in July. It was about a 2 or 3 page document. I will definitely recirculate that to everybody. Now,
I don't remember. This is Dan. I don't remember getting it either.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I will recirculate it.
Good.
I will definitely recirculate it. I think July was the initial time frame that I put it out there after, I think it was your June teleconference.
I don't remember getting it either, so it would be good, Bennett, if you would recirculate it. This is Dan.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Where I was about to go with my next comment is that we've had a lot of information, and if you follow the suggestion that Walt made in terms of a couple of people sitting down and coming up with what we can do to fix it on the short run, and then how we're going to build a budget for 2014. But I think we need to also pay attention to the conversation that Charlie and I just exchanged on the have-tos. The have-tos are absolutely essential, and I think in order to be a successful organization, what we're likely to do, and this comes from my personal experience running an organization that had volunteers in it, but if you keep giving heavy-duty organizational development tasks over to volunteers, and in particular volunteers, and I don't mean to offend anybody by calling you out by age, but anyway, I'm one of those, so I feel perfectly willing to do that. If that's the cadre of volunteers that you're going to use, you're in for a good shock because you'll burn them out. And you've heard comments here and there on the part of some leadership people in NaCCRA that they're feeling the stress of that. They feel the sense of responsibility and the sense of commitment. But if you keep laying it on them without being able to give them some of the fiscal tools so that we can let people like Bennett ask, or we can ask Bennett for more without providing the resources to get more, we're just running around in a circle.
Ron, this is Dan. I think the conversation has been enormously helpful so far, but there's one thing I'd like to flag and see just before we sort of talk about next steps, what the true meaning of it is. And Ron, I'd like to quote your memorandum to us in response to one of my questions. You say, finally, upon examination of the September 26th accountant's report, I want to ask for clarification of the statement. Management has elected to omit substantially all of the disclosures and statement of cash flows required by generally accepted principles. What is the implication of this? Are we not practicing the normal disclosure of our finances to each other and to the public?
Well, I asked that question potentially out of ignorance because I don't know what it means either. But it is
a very stunning statement.
It is a statement that reflected my curiosity primarily because I've seen a number of accountants' reports, but I've never seen a statement like that. Now,
yeah, Bennett, can you explain that?
Yes. This has been it. I mean, I responded to Jack Cumming, and I can effectively kind of forward that to folks. And I'm not a CPA, but I will give you the context behind the language. Lanigan and Associates is effectively our partner, not only for NaCCRA bookkeeping and accounting services, but all of our clients. And I can tell you, if you read it as it reads, it can be very concerning. And if I was in your shoes, I would have the same, perspective. My understanding from Lanigan, and I can have one of the principals from Lanigan, circulate a memo because I've had them to do that for board training for other groups, is effectively, since they're an outsourced relationship. They're not in-house with us. They have to put that language, they're required to put that language in a memorandum form before you see the balance sheet and before you see the statement of activity. But effectively, I've shared with Mr. Cumming and some others in the past, and I can circulate this full board. It doesn't mean that you're not disclosing something. So let me give you an example. When we circulate the financial report to Mr. Walton and President Walsh and now Mr. Cumming, we get both what's called a short form and a long form financial statement. The long form includes the general ledger for that 30-day period. And your treasurer, when it's working right, has online access to the bank account as well, so he can track activity. So there's not anything, from a fiduciary standpoint that is missing. In that standpoint, it's just that's required language when, an outside entity is performing the bookkeeping and preparing the financial. They have to include that language. I can tell you, based on what I know with other peers, that run other associations, I've not actually seen other accounting firms actually put that language, even though it's technically required. So all they're usually submitting is the balance sheet and the statement of activity. So, but we feel like you should have that because that is what's required. But I could definitely get something from Lanigan that I think would give you comfort, in why they're having to use that language.
This Walt Boyer, I can tell you what it meant to me, which may or may not be correct. What it meant to me was that NaCCRA does not put out an annual report to the public. It puts one out internally, but it does not put one out to the public, and that is available to the public. So that's what they meant by disclosure. That there's a document that provides information on our finances available to the public. The other part of that is the IRS Form 990.
Yep.
Our finances are below, I think, the $50,000 threshold, in which we have to start declaring our finances. So the Form 990 that I'm sure Bennett submits for us is very perfunctory, just lists the officers, and that's about all. And the total, and the fact that our total finances are below $50,000. So we really are not expressing in a public document where we stand financially, and I think that's what I interpreted that to mean.
Mr. Boyer,
Okay, go ahead, Bennett.
I just wanted to echo Mr. Boyer that his analysis is also correct in the sense of twofold. It doesn't mean that NaCCRA's board couldn't, if it wanted to share its financials with anybody that requested. You always have that right. But at this point, we haven't really had a request for it, but you don't have a policy to do it either. And on the 990, as Mr. Boyer correctly pointed out, you effectively, meaning NaCCRA, has effectively a postcard tax return because of the revenue stream, meaning a normal 990 is going to be 18 to 30 pages, but you're under the revenue stream that doesn't require that. And even though you're a C3, in 990, there is a public disclosure law that any member of the public has a right to 990s. Yours is such an abbreviated form, somebody reading it really wouldn't get much out of it because it's such a short form. I just want to echo he's correct in that part of the analysis.
Well, this is Dan. I certainly would be reluctant to get us into the rigmarole of filing 990s. I must say that the plain English in this paragraph reads differently to me than the interpretation of it, and the interpretation of it may be quite correct, but I would appreciate some further sort of comment from the accountants who wrote that sentence explaining to us what it means.
Joe Walton here.
Would that cost money?
No, it would not. And just to clarify, Mr. Seeger, this has been, I know Mr. Walton wanted to say, they didn't write the language. required language. So it's not the Flanagan themselves didn't write that language. It's a national standard language that's used.
I would just like to add, I'm a little concerned that some participating in this meeting, listening to this conversation, may feel that there isn't a level of transparency in our financial matters that should be present. I'm not an accountant. My background is marketing, but I've worked as treasurer for NaCCRA since the start of 2011, and during all of that time, I am satisfied that there is adequate transparency. Partners make sure that I get all the information a treasurer needs, keep track of income and where it's going, and break it down in detail. And all of this is reported to our membership and to our board on a regular basis. These reports are published in the newsletter. So I think as far as NaCCRA members are concerned, our membership and potential membership, there is adequate transparency in our reporting on fiscal matters. And no one should have concern about that.
This is Dan. I'm not suggesting that there's any, how shall I say, I'm not suggesting that there's anything, any kind of malfeasance going on by any means, and I definitely have utter confidence in the integrity of everyone involved. But let me just say, as a board member, a relatively new board member, I do wonder a little bit about the amount of transparency we have with each other on the board. I'm sure we do a very good transparency with regard to the general public. But, for example, I, as a board member, having only, numbers that for administrative support go from 6,000 to 13,000 to 18,000 to 18,000, or for office of travel that go from 3 all the way up to 18, and similarly for donations, all coming from one source. It would have been helpful to know a little bit more detail about all those things sooner, and we probably would have been able to jump on top of the difficulties sooner.
Yeah, that's legitimate. Joe Walker here. What you're saying is legitimate. But again, what you're asking for is a manifestation of the fact that we do not have eyeball-to-eyeball discussions.
That's correct.
Right. 2 hours, twice a year, with a crowded agenda. At the late in the day, we never have substantive discussions about these issues.
If I could, this is Ron, if I could ride my horse one more time, it comes down to how well the board how well the board operates, and what does it need to do to improve its governance function. And I think Dan's question is a legitimate one. And the first thing that flashed through my mind was, and I don't know how we get at this, because we're a small organization at the moment, but eventually we need to face the question, how do we orient new board members? How do they know? Now, the manual, I got a call today, the manual is on its way. It will help inch us a little bit closer to a little higher standard of board members if they read it, board members understanding what NaCCRA is about. And I think Dan's question is as legitimate as mine, and I don't consider myself to have been illegitimate in my question, and I appreciate Joe raising that from a transparency perspective. But it's how we govern, and we need to be sure that we do the best job we can, and it is tough when all the things that we've talked about, but not done a whole lot about, are not in place. And if we're going to move to the next level, we're going to have to do those things. We're going to have the money, we're going to have the planning, we're going to have all the rest of it. And the ideal answer, a solution to Dan's question is you have an orientation for new board members so that some of these things, particularly if it's obvious that, Dan, you've had some exposure and experience, particularly if they've had it, but they've never seen what I shared with you in my memorandum, a statement like was in the bottom paragraph of this accountant's report. You legitimately should ask the question, wait a minute, what in the world is this? It doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. What it may mean is that nobody just has ever explained it. That's the problem, and that's a governance issue, and how a board assumes its fiduciary responsibility to run the best governance that it can run with the resources that it has. And we're short on resources, period, end of dictation.
Yeah, truly true.
This is Dan. Could I make a suggestion following up on Joe Walton's comments about eyeball-to-eyeball meetings? Regardless of what we may decide in the long run about officer travel expenses, we are committed to getting ourselves together in Dallas.
Yes.
I presume that's irreversible. So we might as well take advantage of it. So I guess the question I want to raise is, should we, while we're in Dallas, all of us skip one of the leading age educational sessions and get together as a board with no guests present, because these kinds of discussions are very difficult with guests present, and do an eyeball-to-eyeball on these issues we're discussing today. And maybe by that time, a little committee could have come up with something better than my estimates for 2013 end-of-year figures, plus a balanced budget proposal for 2014 that we could then, as a board at Dallas, just sit with each other and discuss.
I don't have any problem with that if people are going to be able to stay. I don't know when people are going to start pulling out. But theoretically, everybody should be there on Sunday, but Monday, which is when things get underway, if we could steal an hour or so, or two, and find a room and meet. And I don't see any problem with that.
I think one of the observations I would make is if the board decides that it wants to follow Dan's suggestion, I think it would be essential that quickly we find out who's coming and if enough of them are going to stay. I, for one, for example, am coming in on Saturday to the board meeting. I have two pieces of responsibility on Sunday in relationship to program content, and then I'm gone Monday morning.
What time do you have to leave Monday morning?
I think it's 10 o'clock.
Oh, that's very early.
Is there a way that the meeting, your responsibility is over at 5:30? It's going to be a full day on Sunday, but we could theoretically meet after that. And
I wouldn't build my decision around me. I use myself as one example that would draw attention to the fact that before one would try to implement this, you better make sure that you got enough people to make it work.
There's enough people, yes. Well, we do have a meeting scheduled for Saturday evening,
yes,
right?
Yes, we do.
So,
and then,
I guess the question is that going to be full of guests, or is that going to be time for us to really...
It's Ruth here, and I have tried to restrict it really to our board. And I have asked Catherine as a consultant to join us, but other than that, it's really going to be our board meeting.
What time will all the board be there?
Ruth.
No, and it starts. I'm circa being 5 or 5:30, and they're going to feed us, or we're going to eat from the menu, and we will meet until we're done.
Is it possible that enough of us are arriving soon enough on Saturday that we could schedule the starting meeting at 2 o'clock?
No, I don't think a lot of people aren't coming in. They'll be in time for the late afternoon meeting.
I'm arriving on Friday in order to be there for dinner on Saturday because of the time schedule.
I think it's it's one of those things. But if we have a minute, I know that Ron has to leave on Monday, and wait a minute until I find. I have all kinds of poop sheets here. Everyone is coming. Is that correct?
Ruth, this is Jack.
Except that I know that Charlie Paul not be there.
Yeah, Ruth,
He's going to try to come in on a conference call.
Ruth, this is Jack.
Yeah.
I think you've invited Jennifer Flowers to be there. I believe that Bob Smith, who is being sent...
I told him to come later.
Wait, let me finish my talk. I think Bob Smith, he's representing Florida, and he's being sent there at their expense, and there may be people from other associations who are being sent there at association expense. Those people all expect to be at that meeting, so you'd be
talking about the meeting, our board meeting.
I
know that people will come to the Sunday morning.
I understand that, but didn't you invite Jennifer Flowers to come to the board meeting?
She's the one from
Texas, yes.
From Texas, yeah.
And I encouraged her to do that.
And this is Ron. I want to just second what Dan has said. It's very hard for a board to take its laundry that it has to wash out and fix and do whatever it has to do. It's hard for it to have guests sitting in the room.
Exactly.
It will dampen the frankness, and it will dampen the constructive conversation that can happen.
Right.
Is there anybody who would be willing to wait after would have our little board meeting on dinner thing or other and do it after that? We'll all be the walking wounded by then, but...
Where are we going to meet?
We're going to meet in the dining... There is a dining room associated with the hotel, and I have been in touch with one of the gentlemen from that dining room. He said there's kind of like a little alcove, and so we're going to try to set us up there for dinner and meet.
And we're going to meet there as well. And Catherine and Jennifer and various other people will be with us.
Apparently, yes. I knew Catherine was going to be there, and Jennifer, but Bob Smith said he would come in later. And there are several other people. So, but theoretically...
What is our schedule like on Sunday? Do we have any time on Sunday to meet only as a board without guests?
Well, it depends on when people get in. On Sunday, there is no time. Well, this is the problem because we have our NaCCRA meeting from 9 to 11. Then there's a luncheon. Then the leading age kickoff meeting is at 1, and that runs until 3. Then 3:30 to 5:35 is Ron's workshop. So we could theoretically meet at 1 o'clock. And you just have to miss the opening session of the
how about Sunday evening?
Well, Sunday evening things are done at 5:30, so we could meet after that. And we probably I'll see if we could. Or we could meet at the hotel, or we could meet we could find a room to meet, and I could
find a room to meet at the hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that could be easiest.
Let me ask Dan again. Could you restate what you envision to be the purpose of that meeting?
Well, I envision that perhaps a small committee, a small budget committee, of course, which would include Joe, a small budget committee would improve my estimation of the 2013 final budget, and it will project the rest of this year in a realistic way what we'll wind up with, and we'll design a budget for 2014 which is balanced, and that we will use those inputs as a kickoff for a thorough discussion of how we're going to write the fiscal ship of NaCCRA, just privately among ourselves with no guests present.
Well, if people are game, I'll see if I can find a place for us to meet Sunday evening after that workshop if everybody isn't spent.
I mean, it is difficult because we will all be exhausted, but it seems to me important that we have an Joe Walton's eyeball-to-eyeball kind of meeting about this matter.
And I agree. I think that's important, just by ourselves.
And this is Judy, and I think it's important that we have some discussion of what the revenue is going to be, what we are going to do about membership.
Right.
Yep. So all of those will. There's going to be a full agenda for our board meeting, but we'll try to keep it non-controversial, and we'll just go from there. But I think it is very important that we have some special time just for us all to talk and be able to be frank and honest.
And also to do it on the basis of you might say, experienced people like Joe and perhaps Ron and anyone else to do an estimate of income and expenses for the current year, which is realistic for the end of the year, and then design a budget which is balanced, which will inevitably make compromises. It may eliminate one board meeting, or it may cut down on the number of lifelines, or do something that we won't like. And then we'll discuss, what we want to do to make this budget balanced, But we need a little group to present us with a balanced budget so that we can remake it with as a result of discussion.
I agree.
This is Ron. I'm at about 12:15, or I'm sorry, 2:15, and I don't know how much time we've allotted to do this, but I want to see if we couldn't press the question a little bit on what's the deliverable we expect at the end of this meeting today. One of the things I find is that it's easy to get in a meeting and get engaged in a lot of conversation, but unless at the end of that meeting you can say we accomplished the reason for which we got together, and this is what we're going to do in the future. Now we got a future piece, but I want to be clear.
I'd like to try 3 deliverables.
Wait a minute, Ron, please let Ron finish.
Pardon me?
Ron,
So I just want a deliverable in terms of what did we accomplish at the end of this meeting, and what did we walk away with in addition to Dan's suggestion that we find the time to get together and tell this.
All right, Bob Nicholson, I have 3 deliverables. One is that we ask all the board members, insofar as their situation permits, to participate in their travel. That, for me, is an on and off thing, but that's something Charlie referred to, and let's do what we can do. Number 2, I think, we have not talked about increasing revenue. And if I may use the Boy Scouts of America as an example, we may have a million boys who are Boy Scouts, and they pay $5.95 a year, which in no way in the Chief Seattle Council pays for leadership training, staff, administrative services, and camping. And so we have, on top of that registration fee, a Friends of Scouting thing every year, and adults who care about their kids kick in $50, $100, $200, $500. I think we've got to have something like a Friends of NaCCRA, where we give not just board members a chance to give over and above and not charge travel costs, but say to 200 people that we know, each of us knows 3 or 5 or 10 people, can you help us in the coming year with a $100 gift to be a Centennial Club member to support NaCCRA? That'll give us $15,000 right there. And we've got to explore some revenue things. We've talked about advertising for NaCCRA or Lifeline that would help defray those costs. There are just some, and I'm neither a fundraiser nor a PR person, but it just to me we've got to get those kind of things, like Dan says, and chew them around in an informal, face-to-face way and critique them as to what can help benefit the income that we need to continue to advance the membership we have.
Okay.
A third deliverable, Bob?
Well, his third deliverable was a business initiative. This is Jack. A business initiative to raise money from sponsors. Mike, I would, on talking about deliverables, I would go back to the question we started with. I'm not sure that we're all convinced that we have a clear financial picture of where we stand right now at this juncture. We have this questionable statement from the auditors, which has been dismissed as saying that this is just boilerplate from the AICPA. So one thing we need is a set of common financials that we all agree with. And then I think what we're saying is that we need the administrative support, so we can't cut that expense at all. Therefore, we have to find revenues to cover that expense. And Judy Moss made clear that that's her focus, which I think is a very good one. We need to find members who are willing to finance this organization, or it's a question of whether it has merit. And then Bob Nicholson brought in the concept of a fundraising program, and we've tried that, but without much success in the past. And is there something that we're going to be doing differently this time? So the real deliverable that you're looking for, what has changed as a result of this meeting, and where do we stand now that where we weren't before the meeting?
Let me repeat the questions. Do our financials present the true picture or condition of the organization? If we have financials showing NaCCRA's true finances, is NaCCRA now financially viable? 3, if NaCCRA is not financially viable, what steps must we take to make it viable? If steps toward financial viability are needed, do we have sufficient time to bring those steps into effect, or are there emergency actions that the board must take? And one that I added to that is, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
Right? Conversation about that. So those are the questions that, and they're very similar to ones I raised in my initial in my initial email that I thought needed to address today and had to be answered.
Well, I think, this is Dan, I think we've accomplished a lot today. At least I feel a lot has been accomplished, because I've learned much more than I knew before we went into the conversation. The questions I had have been answered. I think the deliverables should be, I never expected we were going to be able to come out of a telephone conversation with a plan for the future. But I believe that what we have, that if we can get a small budget committee together to plan something for us to chew over in a private meeting, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball in Dallas, that'll be a huge step forward that we will have initiated in this meeting.
Are we ready to appoint, or do we assume we know, by virtue of the structure of the organization, that budget committee or that budget building committee will be Joe Walton and who else?
Maybe the officers, all the officers.
Okay, so we're talking about the secretary and the president.
That's good.
Okay.
And the president-elect.
And the president-elect.
Well, I think here again, you have to remember that, I don't know, I can't speak for Dan, but I can speak for myself. I'm not sure I have enough information, enough history of the organization to do that. And so,
well, nor do I. But this is a run plus for board member education, and we're all being educated on this. And I think we just have to do this. The other thing that I want to just interject here is that one of the things that we should be also thinking about are nominations for the board, which will come because there will be an election in April. And Milt Birdsall, who is the president of Florida, lives at Indian River West in Vero Beach, has a part of the state association presidents, and he has said that he would be willing to be the chairman of the nominating committee for this election coming up. And so we really need to talk about people that would be real good additions to our board of directors. Not the fact that you're breathing, because that's very important, but we need people as an attorney or a CPA or some people with extra skills in order to augment our numbers and enrich our numbers. So be thinking of people that would be a real good addition to the nominating committee, and also, he's going to name the nominating committee, but people who would be nominees for office to be elected in April. Because that's very important.
This is Dan. That's very important, but I'm just wondering if we can clinch this budget committee before we get distracted.
I just wanted to interject that while I was pontificating. Yes.
Good.
Joe, is there anybody that you would have to be on that committee with you, with us?
I think that covered the suggestions on membership. That's okay with me.
It is.
I think with Bennett's help, the financial people have to take the lead on that. Obviously, as treasurer, I need. Dan has done a yeoman's job of bringing about this candor and discussion. He will be important, but I think others can contribute. I'm thinking, for example, revenue development. If we can get some ideas of the people who are responsible to leading the membership drive to come up with their plan and estimates of what cost is associated with that, that would be very helpful. In determining what our budget is going to be at the end of the year, what our expenses are going to be at the end of the year, and what our budget should be next year, it would be helpful for you to provide to us your estimated travel expenses and other incurred expenses between now and the end of the year. You know, we've got some pretty good figures. We have very good figures for what we've spent over the last 7 months, and to round that out, to have your estimates would be very helpful. I know a lot of the expenses that are associated with the Dallas meeting have already been submitted and reimbursement, but there's more to come, and if you could give me an estimate of what you think your submission for reimbursement is likely to be, it would be very helpful.
And that's for all of the board?
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yes.
Can I go back to Ruth and ask, is the chair of the nominating committee going to be in Dallas?
Yes.
No.
Oh, he's not?
No, I talked to him yesterday. He's
did?
not available to make the meeting, so he will not be there. But he will be happy to serve as chair. But he will not be able to go to Dallas.
Okay. Well, he's very enthusiastic, so I'm sure that good things are going to happen on that score. So if you have any people that you are aware of who would be good additions to the board, please let him know.
Okay.
And Bennett, I hope you would be an advisor to this committee that Joe's going to chair, the budget committee.
Madam Chair, what I was going to say is by early next week I will submit to the working group that's been appointed a couple of pro formas to start as the foundational document the group could work from, and be happy to do that, and think you're on a good track here.
Yeah, I appreciate your being willing to do that, because we're all a bit eager to get us to pull out of our doldrums and really excel.
Okay, anything else that we need to cover in this particular meeting? Any comments or observations? I mentioned to you, several of you, let me just share, the manuals are in. I'm supposed to pick them up tomorrow. Several people are not going to be there, and a couple of people have asked that they be mailed directly to them so that they could stream them into their computers, and I will get those out probably Wednesday afternoon. The rest of them I'm having shipped to Dallas, because I don't intend to carry 4 or 5 of those big manuals back on the airplane with me, and if I get stuck with them, they're going to get stuck in a hotel.
May I ask who is not coming? Besides Charlie?
Well, Charlie, Marlene are 2 people who I know are not coming. I'm going to send one independently to Bennett, because I think our
absolutely
relationship with partners needs to have that kind of a document as a part of who we are and who they work with and for. So then the rest of them I'll just ship.
Ron, I'd like to get mine in advance. I think it would be helpful if we read them before the meeting so we could discuss anything.
Well,
so I'd appreciate getting mine early.
Okay.
See, that's an added, I hate to sound mercenary, it's an added expense.
Yeah, I think
well, it's an added expense to carry it home.
Well, it does. If you carry very many of them home, it's an expense, because what it does is
breaks your arm.
then the luggage weighs more than they'll allow, and then you have to pay the extra luggage charge. But if you want an additional one, I'll mail yours directly.
I think it would be helpful if all the board got them before.
I'm wondering, Ron, would that be so much? Would that be so much more work to send them to board members individually than to send them?
I agree it would be more work, but it may be more constructive if we had something to talk
Just
about.
understand, you're just a little over 2 weeks until we're heading for Dallas, so just think about how much you're going to be able to read.
I was trying to be prudent from an expense perspective.
I appreciate that.
And so, if you now are saying you want them all mailed individually, that's what I will do.
What is the feeling of the group?
I think it.
I
suggest we could.
Wait a minute. We'll do it one at a time, please, Dan.
Well, I'd like to say I would find it very helpful if Ron was able to mail them tomorrow or the next day. We would get them in 2 or 3 days, and we'd have a week to study them before the meeting.
Yep, you can do that. I can do it.
Could you, I'm sure this is an unreasonable question, but my community would mail those, and it'll be their nickel. But the Glebe wouldn't do that, would they?
No, absolutely not. If they could, they would probably burn them before they hit the post.
Right.
All right.
My community wouldn't do it either. No.
Well, Stone Ridge would, so that's why
I'm just to a decision on the matter. I'm going to mail them to you individually rather than shipping them to the hotel.
All right.
Great.
So that's a good decision. Thank you.
Okay, I got to go. Let 30 minutes.
Yeah, somebody said Ruth. What?
Ruth, it's Dan. I'm just going to say that I'll have the minutes of this meeting.
The following participant has left the conference.
And Bob Nicholson.
Oh. All right. Well, thank you for whatever you're able to come up with. God love you for this. I hope you get it on tape. Do you?
No, I don't, but I'll be able to do it. I'll get it to you this afternoon, and then if we can get it. So I just want to alert people to watch the minutes so that you can offer corrections if any are.
All right. Bless your heart. That's wonderful. I'll tell you,
everybody.
I really appreciate that. And Dan, and thank you. And good to talk with you, Bob. And yes.
Ruth, this is a little aside from the meeting, but it's an important question. The issue, the November-December issue of Lifeline is carrying an article, Valley Road, that lays out the plan for membership development. And I've read that article, and there's a number of upcoming meetings of state associations. I think that a lot of the members are going to come to those state association meetings with questions about that. Is it being planned that these state associations are going to be prepared to address those questions?
Well, now, Bennett, is Bennett still here? When did those get mailed? I know that I just got a note from Marlene saying that they were ready to be sent.
Well, she had some changes that she made yesterday with the designer, so the printer just got it today. So it's not even printed yet. So so it probably members won't probably get it at least for a week and a half. I'm sure most of them honestly probably won't get it before y'all leave for Dallas, depending on the delivery.
Well,
where
that's
they are.
what I was thinking. I know Connecticut meets on Thursday, and Joe and I will be there. But no one will have seen the draft except us board members.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to tell you, Joe, on
Is
that
the topic on the agenda for the meeting Thursday?
No, I don't think so. I did not see it. Oh, she sent me an
I
agenda.
haven't seen the agenda for the
Nor I. I don't think so.
I see.
But I'm not sure. So anyway, we'll just play it by ear.
The board meeting is over, correct? So I'll hang up.
Okay, I think it is. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Nope.
I
Okay.
thank everyone. It's been very productive. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
The following participant has left the conference. The following participant has left the conference.
Walton Boyer.
The following participant has left the conference.
Bennett.
The following participant has left the conference.
Dan Seeger.
The following participant has left the conference.
Judy Moss.
Are you here, Ron? Is Ron gone? Yep, I guess he is Ruth Walsh.
The following participant has left the conference.
Ruth Walsh.